Welcome back, everyone. We had a wonderful live masterclass in the previous session. We have another great session right now. It's well-being, being a caretaker during COVID-19 by Mallika Noor Mehta. We have Mallika here. She's a mental health entrepreneur. Her interest in mental health stems from her experience as a TFI fellow in the 2013 batch, and from her time working to create education programs for Syrian refugees in Jordan and Greece. Mallika has previously worked at the Tata Trust and Course Invest. She holds a master's in public policy from the Harvard Kennedy School. Thank you so much, Mallika, for being here. Over to you for the next 20 minutes.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here and for having me. And I have to say it's a little strange to be doing this in this way over Zoom. I kind of wish I could be sitting in front of you in a live audience. But still, here we are. This is our world. So today I'm here to speak about well-being and mental health and how well-being has shifted and changed in COVID times. And I want you to know that I'm speaking from my own experience as a mental health entrepreneur. And I'm happy to talk about those experiences later if you're interested. But you should know that I'm not a psychologist and I'm not a counselor. And what I'm going to speak about today is purely based on my own surveys, my online research, my in-person interviews with therapists, with children, with parents, with teachers over the last year and a half. So first off, I wanted to address the mental health burden in India. There is no question in my mind that today India faces a mental health crisis. The renowned medical journal in the UK called the Lancet Journal stated that as of February 2020, 197 million people faced mental health challenges in our country. Just let that sink in. 197 million. Of that, 45 million faced issues with anxiety and 44 million faced issues with depression. Just think about those numbers and also know that these are only approximations. The true numbers are likely much higher. Also recognize that these numbers are pre-COVID. The pandemic has likely made these numbers rise exponentially, the extent of which we will only know in many years, probably. So, as I thought about what to talk about today, I couldn't help but think about the mental health crisis and think about how it likely impacts one of the most important caregivers in our society today, the teacher. The teacher is a very special kind of caregiver. While the job description is to teach children, most of the time the role of the teacher extends far beyond just the classroom. A teacher is someone who invariably has to know about their children's mental health, physical health, living situation, and any other circumstances that impact a child. The role is all-encompassing in that way. Pre-COVID, the National Foundation for Educational Research already found that teachers are exposed to greater job-related stress relative to most other professions. They found that 1 in 5 teachers feel tense in their job. That's 20% of teachers in our country. So now imagine the potential negative impact of COVID on our teachers. Invariably, the pandemic has caused a unique amount of mental stress and strife for our teachers. And as we think long-term about our children's mental well-being, it is critical to acknowledge that the well-being of the child is intimately connected to the well-being of the teacher. So therefore, I want to spend a little bit of time discussing the stressors in teachers' lives today due to COVID and how to potentially improve their mental well-being. So in COVID times, what are the main stressors to our teachers? Well, sure, I can be a little louder. I can see that. So I was saying in COVID times, what are the main stressors to our teachers? Well, the overarching one is naturally the shift from in-person teaching to online teaching. This shift has changed the way content and lessons are created and delivered to our students. It is now difficult for our teachers to pick up on non-verbal cues from our children, to ask for immediate feedback from them, to give them feedback or constructive criticism. It is also difficult for our teachers to gauge how the class is functioning as collective, both academically and socially. For instance, who is friends with whom? Which students are not getting along? Is there any one student feeling lonely? School is not just about academics, it is also about a social environment. And that social environment has now been snatched away from our students. And that invariably impacts their mental health, which in turn impacts our teachers. But how can a teacher adequately gauge the mental health and happiness of his or her student while sitting behind a computer screen? Then the teachers face the added challenge of understanding each individual child's academic level. In many private and government schools, children in one classroom are at different grade levels, and therefore teachers have to cater their lesson plans to each individual grade level. Now, imagine being a new teacher in COVID times, having never met your students face to face, and still having to gauge each child's academic level over WhatsApp or over a computer screen. Many times, children's academic performance is impacted by external circumstances. Imagine having an autistic child in your classroom or one that is dyslexic. Imagine having a child who has previously been abused or has witnessed something traumatic that has impacted his or her mental health. Now imagine being a teacher trying to provide support for such students through online modalities. It is almost an impossible task. And if that wasn't enough, many teachers are having their salaries cut or not paid at all. Many of them themselves do not have easy access to computers. And even with access, many of them are inexperienced with technology and the online tools required to adequately teach students because they haven't necessarily been trained as such. Finally, it is also really important to acknowledge that teachers are caregivers in many capacities. Of course, to our students, but also perhaps to their own children, or parents, or grandparents, or spouses. And with the lack of division between home and school, the teacher, like many other working professionals, is now faced with the challenge of blurred lines between work and personal life. So for teachers who come from low-income areas or communities, the need to simply put food on the table while also working to support their students becomes an even bigger existential crisis. And then to also think about, if you're in a low-income community, not necessarily having a private space at home to conduct school sessions leads to further breakdown of teaching practices and content delivery. So for all of these reasons, and perhaps many more, teachers' well-being is significantly negatively impacted in these times. Now, of course, we should think about how to alleviate this stress and how to improve mental health for teachers and their well-being. And in order to do this, we must think a little bit about who in particular impacts their well-being. It is first and foremost, of course, our students. Then number two, our parents. And of course, number three, our school administration and our government. Now, as a student, naturally, the first thing we can do to help our teachers is to just show up and be on time and pay great attention to what they're teaching and to try and complete all the work that is given to you in a timely manner. I also know from having been a teacher myself that I felt so much joy every time a student sent me a thank you note, even if it was one just scribbled on the back of tissue paper. I know that that expression of gratitude went a really long way for me, and I imagine any teacher would feel so happy to be recognized in those ways by their students. As parents who themselves are juggling home, children, work, there needs to be a kind of shared camaraderie with teachers. In many ways, teachers and parents face very similar challenges in COVID times. Schools need to enhance and encourage teachers and parents' interaction, not just for student well-being, but for the well-being of the parents and the teachers. They need to know that they're in the same boat and facing the same challenges together. And then finally, as a school, the administration must strive to pay their teachers their full salaries. That is essential. They must also ensure that teachers from all backgrounds have access and adequate training in technological tools, because that's what they're using today. And finally, the administration must acknowledge that this is a very trying time for teachers and therefore provide counseling services to teachers if that is possible. I believe strongly that the government has a very big role to play in teacher well-being, because especially in municipal schools, they will not be able to support their teachers technologically or through trainings or through mental health services without such government support. So I think that is really key. And finally, I know I haven't spoken about what individual teachers can do for themselves, but in that vein, I don't think that those hacks are just for teachers. The eating right, the sleeping well, the meditation, the journaling, the exercise, I think those are activities that we all need to employ in our lives, and especially as people who are parents, teachers, or students. Because today, that's what's going to keep us going. But right now, I wanted to focus on the individual stressors for teachers and what we as a community can do to alleviate those stressors and to improve their mental health. I hope that was helpful, and I would be happy to take any questions right now.
Thank you so much, Mallika. Dear participants, dear viewers, if you have any questions, you can paste it on the chat window. I'll be asking those questions to Mallika. A lot of people are agreeing with the problems that you mentioned of the teachers are facing. Just wait for some questions to come up. Dear participants, if you have any questions, you can type it in the chat box on YouTube. Yeah, people are also saying a lot of teachers are affected because of COVID-19.
Absolutely. I think that the teachers and parents' lives have been changed completely. So,
yeah. As of now, we don't have any question. Yeah, there's one question. How to overcome, like, you have any proposed solution for this? So, like, basically how to overcome the situation, how to overcome, some people may be facing depression. How do we overcome that?
Sure, I think that's a really great question. So I'll be very personal. I see a therapist, and I'm privileged enough and lucky enough to be able to see one, to afford one. And I think there are many people in our world, in our country, who are not as privileged and cannot afford one. But I think at first, the awareness that you face a mental health issue, if you are depressed or if you are anxious, to just become aware of it, to sit with yourself and ask yourself, am I eating correctly? Am I sleeping correctly? Am I working as much as I should be, or am I working too much? I again think that this applies to all of us, not just to teachers. And I think that this is, of course, a privileged perspective, because there are many people in our country who cannot afford to sit back and ask these questions, because it's a do or die situation. It's just a matter of survival. But if you are lucky enough to be able to sit back and ask these questions, I think those are very key in building awareness and understanding your own mental situation. I think accepting it and saying, I do have a problem, and saying, I should seek help. Who can I seek help from? And reaching out to people who could potentially help you is the next step. And that entails taking action. So that's what I mean. That I think in my mind, there's awareness, acceptance, action. So becoming aware, accepting there's a problem, and then finally taking action. I think there is there shouldn't be a stigma. And I think there is stigma around accepting mental health challenges in our country. But we are living in such trying times that it would be almost stupid to expect people to be just okay right now, because they're not. And it would be, I think, even more inappropriate to expect people who come from lower income backgrounds who are facing existential crises of just putting food on the table and then also supporting their children and also supporting a job and their parents and their spouses to expect to be okay. It is, I don't think any of us are okay. So I think my way of handling it very personally is to see a therapist. I went through a very personal journey in that regard. I took time to become aware of my own thoughts and problems and accept them. And then the next step was to talk to my friends and family about it, and then finally to seek professional help, if you can.
Thank you so much for that. And also in the chat box, people are saying thank you for normalizing going and meeting a therapist. Like consider to be a stigma, consider to be maybe a bad thing. But then people are saying thank you for that. Thank you so much for that. We have one more question. How can parents and teachers help each other to take care of themselves in terms of mental health? Is there any tips on that, helping each other?
Absolutely. I think that's also a great question. And I'll speak from my experience as a teacher. Of course, that was many years ago and was before COVID. But the way that I thought that I supported my parents the parents of my students, and the way that they supported me was one through very regularly meeting them, to have them come to school if schools are not open right now. So to have to be on the phone with them or to be texting them, to be asking each other how you are. It's funny how that very simple question actually goes a very long way if you mean it. How are you? As a teacher, how are you? And as a parent, you're probably juggling work, family, household duties. There's so much. So I think the conversation is the starter. I think there needs to be open conversation between parents and teachers. I think schools need to really foster that, because it shouldn't be inappropriate to reach out to your teacher right now. Right now, it is pivotal that the teachers and the parents communicate with each other regularly, for the student and for themselves, and ask each other, how are you? I think that parents, obviously right now parents are taking on a lot of the teaching duties because the parents are at home with the with the children. But I think accepting those duties and figuring out ways of also getting better at the teaching practices at home. So learning from teachers, asking the teachers, what are some of the best practices I can employ at home to help my child learn? I think that's a really smart way of also going about it. Trying to figure out, like, should I be working from, 9 to 10 with my student, then giving him a half an hour break and then working with him again for another hour? Can I check in with you, the teacher, and ask for your feedback on the work that we've just completed? Will you be conducting an assessment? If you are, should I help you with it? And of course, parents are working, so this is an extremely difficult situation. But I think that open communication, to set certain routines in place, certain structures in place, so that the child also understands that, so that the parent knows that there's a structure, and so that the teacher can also adapt to that structure, will really go a long way. And that's also what helped me as a teacher, was to know that there was a routine for my students, or even a routine for like parent teacher meetings, that I was going to meet my parents every 1 week. That really helped me. I think right now also there is just a lot of stress going around, and therefore to be a little bit gentle with each other and to acknowledge that perhaps we won't finish the entire syllabus for 2020 this year, because we've been closed for 5 months or more. So that's acceptance is, I think, a very big thing here as well, both on the parents' part and the teachers' part.
Thank you so much, Malika, for that. I think our time is also up. Thank you so much. It was also great to know like how we should just be gentle on ourselves, not only others, but being gentle on ourselves. Thank you so much for that.